Hello, everyone, and welcome to Failure and Analysis. My name is Kevin Jordan, and tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about Azerite, specifically Azerite armor. There's a couple of things I'm going to sort of ignore when it comes to discussing this, like how Azerite is collected, or how, artifact power is collected. And I'll gloss over some things at the beginning that I'll come back to later on, as I want to sort of approach this discussion from an unbiased player and designer. So no spoilers on how good or bad Azerite is. Too late for many of you. So let's dive right in. I'm going to make some comparisons to the closest system that I can think of in WoW's history on how Azerite armor works, essentially. And the closest system I can think of on how it worked were the class sets, let's say from vanilla, but we had class sets in several expansions. So how are they similar? One, they tend to be the premier thing to collect. Two, they offer gameplay changing and character class modifying abilities outside of just attributes. So procs, passive skills, some that are not class specific and some that are class specific. And they also have elements that there's growth within the items themselves. So they unlock in some cases at a higher level, potentially, which is standard for items. And they also offer growth within the item itself. In the Azerite case, it's after you've collected enough Azerite power to get to an Azerite level, it unlocks the ability. For class sets, it is once you equip a certain number of pieces, then you get to unlock those additional abilities. So I consider those two kind of similar in the sense that once you get the item, you're not necessarily done. Sometimes you are under the new yeah, I know it's the door. Sometimes you get to use the item right away, and sometimes you can't. You have to progress a little further before you can unlock the full power. So let's focus on those elements, on how these two systems work. And so essentially, I'll talk about my experience with class sets a little bit. There were definitely times where, I'll be back in 1 second. All right, so back when I was collecting class sets, there were times when I would do the content a little bit below level, right? Like I would go into the dungeons when I was 58 or 59, and I would get a class set item that was required level 60, so I couldn't actually use the item at all for a little while. And then even after I was able to equip it, I didn't necessarily have all the pieces to unlock some of those set bonuses. So there was a sense of, I'm going to be able to unlock all the full powers of this item at some future point that I still have to work towards. Which was exciting, because once I got to the right level, I could equip the thing for the first time, which is an exciting moment. And once I got more pieces, and unlocked more of the puzzle and made me feel more powerful. So there were additional moments beyond just collecting a new piece of gear that layered the experience towards more excitement. And Azerite has some of that as well, because you get a piece of Azerite and it's not necessarily fully unlocked, and so you have to put in a little more progress towards a point at which you can then get access to that new thing. And also the sets of previous expansion, the class sets of previous expansions, had different powers on the later sets, and it was a complicated discussion or complicated decision point on when was the right time to start breaking up old sets and working in the new sets. You could combo the bonuses in different ways, and there was even times when some of the set bonuses were so powerful you would keep them active much longer than that you normally would with the attributes on the item, because they were so powerful. There's some of those elements as well in Azerite. Potentially, depending on where you're at with your Azerite level, your Heart of Azeroth level. And I think a lot of those mechanics are super cool. So that's kind of what Azerite is doing that I think is cool and reminiscent of class sets, or things that it shares in common with those elements, those things. So let's talk about some of the differences. Now, class sets have the additional bonus of being made specifically for my class. So the look of the armor is very specific to my class. Makes me feel really unique and special as that class, whereas a lot of the other armor is less specific. It's more generic. Anyone can wear this that can wear mail and potentially benefit from the armor pieces. Now, I don't know how specific some of the Azerite stuff gets, to be honest, but every time you equipped class set stuff, it felt special because it was designed specifically for you, which Azerite doesn't really feel like it's specific for me. In other words, I don't think that the few Azerite powers that reference abilities that I have are enough to make it feel like it's specifically for me. So I think it's falling a little under the mark in that respect. Now let's talk about the natural play experience in modern WoW, and where I think Azerite starts to really tumble. And it's a lot of it's caused by systems that are unrelated to Azerite specifically. So you guys that have been watching me level my character probably noticed that as soon as I hit a certain level where item level was being displayed on my character and was also gating me from content, that became the most important thing to look at when I was evaluating whether or not to replace a piece of gear. This was long before Azerite, but it's after vanilla, and I can't remember exactly where it comes in, but essentially I stopped looking at the attributes and all I looked at was item level. The only time I looked at attributes was when the item level was exactly the same, and then I could actually go to the secondary important process of comparing the attributes and figuring out, well, I want more haste than I want mastery, and I want more crit strike than I want versatility, so I'm going to prioritize those attributes. But anytime a new item dropped that had a higher item level, I would automatically equip it, and I didn't even look at the secondary attributes. That's something that's been trained into me, because item level is a very important number. It's a very important number because it gates me from content. I have to have a high number in order to do specific content, regardless of my skill or power level, or how much challenge I'm looking for. It also reflects how valuable I am as an asset for acquiring gear to other people in the community, right? And so if I have a high item level, I'm seen as more valuable when it comes to picking me for a group or a raid. And so that becomes the most important number. It becomes more important than all the other numbers. And this affects Azerite very poorly, because when I get a new piece of Azerite, normally in the set case bonus, where I would get a new piece of, like a new set piece item, or a new item that is threatening that old set piece item slot for best in slot, essentially, it becomes this complicated process of look at all the attributes, look at all the base characteristics, and then weigh in the loss of potential set bonuses or additional procs or passive skills that you might be getting from Azerite, and determine whether or not right now is the right time to switch this item. If I have an item that is not a set piece item, or a new item that isn't unlocking a set bonus, then but it's got better attributes, then it becomes this interesting decision point, and the player has to do a little bit of math and figure out, or some gameplay evaluation, figure out whether or not right now is the right time for me to replace. If it's not the right time to replace, he might put it in his bags or bank to replace later. So it might become more valuable in the future, which is what a lot of people did back in the day. You'd store up stuff, and then it was an anticipation moment, and eventually people would get to a point where, oh, it's time to switch over, and you would switch over, and it would be super exciting. So, but because of item level, a lot of times the time to switch is always right now, because you get a new item that has a higher item level, and because this number is so important, a lot of people automatically switch. So there isn't the more complicated decision making process of, is this the right time for me to switch? Because you need those things to appear stronger, and you need those things to access additional content. And so a lot of times people just automatically replace, and then they lose their current powers, and they are also failing to gain the new powers because the new item requires more Azerite level than they have. And that's sort of what leads to this feeling that I'm grinding in order to reacquire the same attributes that I had just a minute ago, or the same special powers that I had, right? And that's caused a lot of people to be unsatisfied with the Azerite system. And so when I try to consider how good a system Azerite is without item level, like imagine item level wasn't in the game, you didn't see it, it didn't gate content, etc. I don't actually think Azerite is that bad a system compared to the class sets. But I do think, because of the prevalence of item level and how important it is in the game, it transforms an okay system into a really bad feeling system, right? So I actually think the real culprit is item level. Now, there's also discussions about how you acquire artifact power, and I haven't played enough of the game to know all the different methods and how grindy it is and how repetitive it is. That's sort of a different discussion. But the appearance of these items and the fact that they modify character progression, not character progression, but character gameplay, I think is fine. But because of item level, it ends up being sort of a secondary consideration to just what the item level of the item is. And so players can't really enjoy the process of, oh, is this the right time to switch over to this item or not? which can be a fun process of sort of min-maxing your character, which I think a lot of people at the high end of the game enjoy doing. So I'm trying to imagine a world where item level didn't exist, and if that alone would sort of save the Azerite armor system. Like, I still think it falls short compared to class design or class sets, because the uniqueness of each class feels really special when they wear them. There's a connectivity to class sets where it's not just the individual items, it's the connection between the other items that Azerite's missing, so it's not as good. But the fact that there's some, skills that are specific to your character, I don't think are the end of the world, and it's things that WoW has done before in a cool way. The absence of character progression outside of Azerite is also an issue, because you're not growing as a character at the same time that you're looking for items that add the cherry on top, essentially. So that's another consideration when I think about Azerite. Having Azerite be the only method by which you feel character progression is also pretty rough, but I don't blame the Azerite system for that inherently. I blame the fact that there's just an absence of character progression outside of it. So yeah, it's that's been my take recently, and it seems like the system is salvageable to some extent, but I think item level is doing a ton of damage to the game and the Azerite system on the whole. And I think the absence of character progression and some connectivity between the items and to my specific class in terms of art are actually what's sort of keeping the Azerite system down. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm going to hit chat here for a little bit to throw out some questions to add to the discussion. If you guys have any questions, throw them out and I'll talk about them. Also, this third middle slot I've talked about before on my stream, but is really lackluster in terms of the final piece, right? This is supposed to be the sweet final thing that you unlock, and a lot of times these feel a lot better than this last piece. But because item level is seen as so important, I can see why developers might feel like this is the creme de la creme of the Azerite pyramid or progression, because item level is so important, but doesn't really feel powerful in terms of gameplay or personal mechanics or anything like that. The weak perks don't make the impact of your playstyle that sets did. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like the sets were very carefully crafted. They also didn't repeat mechanics very often, which, because there's so much Azerite gear, I feel like they had to repeat things, which is inherently bad, because it's one thing to feel like you're getting new things that are new powerful with updated pieces, but again, that feeling of, oh, I got a piece that repeats the same things, makes me feel like I'm just re-earning stuff I was already using. So yeah, probably some are considered key, right? Like if we evaluate all of these things individually, and I assume these Azerite bonuses on various pieces are somewhat random, but may not be, in which case you're randomly hoping it has the characteristics that it has, and if some of them are seen as key gameplay mechanics, they're not a thing you can target in terms of like, I need to go here and farm this piece of gear so that I can get it. It's just sort of, I can go anywhere and farm a piece of gear and hope that it has randomly a specific thing. Okay, so LT says the design choice here is this one is always the most impactful one, and it's less so. I think that's actually, yeah, so that's an interesting choice, right? It could be because people are super annoyed at the grinding required to unlock. But in terms of, you know, the progression feel, it does feel backwards, right? I mean, set bonuses back in the day, you tried to make the what were considered the powerful gameplay changing ones to be in the 2 or the 4, probably the 4. So the end at least had to go halfway into a set to unlock the really powerful things. And it gave you maximum flexibility to pick 2 different sets, you know, max value things in order to reap the benefits. Whereas the 2-piece was a nice thing to have, and then the 6-piece was also nice, but it wasn't always critical. Yeah, that Evan, that's an interesting idea. That these are more like full-fledged talents, and then the armor helps define the characters. That could be done, though. I continue to worry just about, like, you want gear to be gear and class talents and progression to be class talents and progression. Merging the two has some dangerous side effects. That I think does more damage to the item system than the character system. But right now, where the item system is struggling, I think a separation of the two would actually be good. Or at least have the highest percentage of character progression come from the character itself and not from items. So alright guys, well thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Kevin Jordan. I'm from Failure and Analysis. This is my Twitch channel. Please come by and give me a follow and say hello on twitch.tv/failureanalysis. Hope to see you soon. Take care.